In the summer of 2023, Maricopa County, Arizona buried 645 people from the heat. 645. That was a record, highest single-year total in the county's history. And that same summer, in that same city, crews were going through encampments and pulling people's shade tarps. 113 degrees outside. They were taking the shade. Now I want to be precise about something right up front, because I know how the internet works. Cities are not technically making it illegal to own a tent. What they are making illegal is having one with you in public, using it in a public space, setting it up anywhere you don't have permission to be. When you don't have a private space to go to, that distinction doesn't mean much in practice. The result lands the same either way. And since June 28, 2024, the courts have said that's constitutional. That date matters more than most people realize. I'll explain it in a few minutes. And I'm going to save the best piece of gear for last because it's the one they forgot to write a law against. And it might be the most important thing I say. Stay with me. If you're out here in the heat trying to make it work on nothing, this is the channel you found at the right time. Hit subscribe. That's what we do here. Cheap systems, real stakes, and no nonsense. I spent more years than I'll admit sleeping in vehicles and outside. Not because I romanticized it, because that was what was happening, and I had to figure out how to survive it. I'm not here to tell you it was hard and leave you with that. Hard doesn't keep you alive. What kept me alive was paying attention to what actually worked instead of what was supposed to work. The cheap version. The ugly version. The version nobody was selling. That's what I know. That's what this is. So, the obvious answer first? The shelter. I want to be fair here, because the shelter is the right answer in a genuine crisis. First night out. Medical emergency. A weather event that's going to kill you in the next 6 hours. If you are out there for the first time and you have never done this before, the shelter is where you start. I am not going to pretend otherwise. Some of them are good. Some of them are staffed by people who actually care, and you can feel that the moment you walk in. But here's the math. The 2023 point-in-time count put 653,000 people unhoused across the United States on a single night. That is the official undercount. Most researchers who study this put the annual figure closer to 2 million people experiencing homelessness at some point during the year. The national shelter system has roughly 400,000 beds. Even if every bed was filled every night, you are still looking at more than 250,000 people on any given night for whom the shelter isn't an option, because the bed doesn't exist. And the beds that do exist have conditions attached. Check in by 8 in the evening, out the door by 6 in the morning. No pets. Most shelters are gender segregated, which means a couple in crisis gets separated at the door. No vehicles allowed nearby, which matters if your vehicle is the last asset standing between you and absolutely nothing. Many faith-based shelters require sobriety as a condition of entry. Storage for your belongings is communal, and the Vera Institute found that 67% of shelter residents reported having things stolen from inside the shelter while they were there. Phoenix opened emergency heat cooling centers during that record summer of 2023. The total combined capacity across the entire metro area was about 1 in 200 beds. The city's estimated unsheltered population that night was over 9,000 people. 1,100 beds, 9,000 people. Those numbers don't close. The shelter matters. It genuinely does in the acute moment. But it does not function as daily infrastructure for the people who are chronically unhoused. That gap is where this gear lives, and that gap is now being actively policed in ways it wasn't 2 years ago. Here's what most people get wrong about July heat. The air temperature is not the primary threat. Radiation is. Stand in the shade in Phoenix at noon. The air is still 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 Celsius. But you feel the difference immediately, because the sun is not heating the air and then heating you through the air. The sun is hitting you directly, as photons, as radiation. About 1,000 watts per square meter of exposed skin. You are the target, not the air. Black asphalt on a July afternoon reaches 150 degrees Fahrenheit on its surface. That is 65 Celsius. You're not just sitting in hot air, you're sitting next to a radiator the size of an entire parking lot, and it runs all day and most of the night. This is why the cheap reflective materials beat the expensive gear in summer. A thin sheet of aluminized mylar, the stuff emergency blankets are made of, reflects up to 90% of that incoming radiation before it ever converts to heat on your skin. It does not need to be thick, it doesn't need mass or weight, it just needs to be in the way, bouncing the photons back before they land. Think of sunlight as invisible arrows. The silver blanket is a mirror. The arrows bounce off before they touch you. Tent fabric just catches them and heats up, then radiates all that captured heat right back down onto whoever is underneath. That's the physics. Keep it in mind because it runs through every piece of gear we're about to cover. The tent is where the legal crackdown starts, and the case you need to know is Grants Pass v. Johnson, decided by the Supreme Court on June 28, 2024, 6-3. The court ruled that cities can enforce anti-camping ordinances even when there are no available shelter beds for the people being swept. Before that ruling, the Ninth Circuit's decision in Martin v. City of Boise had created a legal protection across 9 western states. If the shelter was full and there was nowhere else to go, you had a constitutionally protected right to have your survival gear. That protection held for 5 years. One ruling, and it was gone. Within 30 days, cities across the country announced expanded enforcement. Denver was already running sweeps every 72 hours in high-priority zones under its urban camping ordinance. Los Angeles updated Municipal Code 4118 in August 2024 to add exclusion zones within 500 feet of schools, parks, libraries, and freeway ramps. San Francisco passed Proposition C in November 2024, mandating a city-wide sweep schedule. Phoenix moved to mandatory 72-hour notice sweeps. Seattle passed an ordinance allowing immediate removal in designated areas without any advance notice at all. The Grants Pass ordinance that started all of this defined camping to include using camp facilities such as a tent. First offense, $295, then a 30-day park ban, then criminal trespass. Los Angeles codes tents as encampment structures. Denver's ordinance is written broadly enough to catch anything that resembles a tent. The visible, obvious shelter is the target every time. What is the job without fitting that legal definition is an emergency bivouac sack. I have slept in one of these in parking lots, in July heat, in drainage ditches in January cold. I will not tell you it is the same experience as a tent. It is not. But here's what it does that a tent cannot. It weighs under 4 ounces. It packs to the size of a deck of cards. The silver side facing out reflects up to 90% of incoming solar radiation in summer. Reverse it in winter, and it retains body heat down to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 Celsius. And no city ordinance in the country classifies it as a structure because it isn't one. It is a personal article, a garment, like a very strange, very flat sleeping bag. The Earl Escape runs $12 to $18 on Amazon. Walmart carries versions for $8 to $10. That is the tent replacement. In rain, pair it with clear 6-mile painter's plastic sheeting, not a blue tarp. Blue tarps have become visually coded in city enforcement guidelines as encampment material. Clear plastic is less visible, and a flat sheet without vertical supports does not qualify as a structure under any ordinance I'm aware of. That distinction is load-bearing. Which brings me directly to the shade problem, because the bivvy handles sleeping, but July's killing hours run from 10 in the morning to 6 in the evening, and those hours require a different solution. San Diego classified tarps on poles as structures requiring permits starting in 2023. Phoenix triggers the encampment definition whenever a shade structure has vertical supports. Los Angeles codes overhead tarps on vertical supports as encampments under 41.18. Seattle prohibits shelters attached to fixed structures in public right-of-way. The common thread in all of them is the pole. A tarp on poles is a structure. A tarp lying flat is a tarp. That legal seam is the whole game. The legal alternative is auto windshield sunshades. I know how that sounds. I know. The accordion fold silver reflective panels you've seen in every gas station and dollar store in the country, the ones that cost $5 to $15, Large format versions for trucks and SUVs run $10 at Walmart and cover a person with room to spare. I've sat under one of these in a parking lot when the temperature gauge on the wall said 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Draped over me, angled slightly to allow air to move underneath, it felt like 90. That 18-degree gap is your body not having to fight as hard to stay alive. The aluminized surface reflects 85 to 90% of the direct solar load before it reaches skin. And it is not a structure, it is personal property. No ordinance classifies it as camping equipment because nobody who wrote those ordinances thought about someone using a windshield shade as survival gear. The airflow gap matters. A flat shade touching your skin traps heat by blocking evaporation. Slightly elevated, propped by your knees or held by one hand, it allows the light breeze to carry sweat away and pull heat off your body. That's the mechanism. Work with it. For evenings, a tilt-capable personal beach umbrella is classified as personal equipment in virtually every jurisdiction reviewed. $20 to $35 at Target or Walmart, more visible than the windshield shade but fully legal. And on a 95-degree evening, it is the difference between sleeping and not sleeping. Now, cooking. The propane camp stove is one of the most common pieces of gear pulled in a sweep, and the reasons for the ban are not entirely cynical. Encampment fires killed people in Seattle in 2021, in Portland in 2020, in Denver in 2019, and again in 2021. The pressurized cylinder is a real hazard in a crowded, flammable environment. Several cities have written propane stoves into their ordinances by name. The ban has a genuine safety rationale layered on top of the enforcement function. But the practical replacement has existed for decades, and almost nobody outside of long-distance backpacking circles talks about it. Denatured alcohol. Specifically, Heat Yellow Bottle, the methanol-based fuel additive you'll find in any auto parts store for $3 to $4 for a 28-ounce container. 28 ounces, 9 hours of cooking fuel. Alcohol burns clean, no pressurized cylinder, no catastrophic tip-over risk. It is not classified as compressed gas under NFPA 58. I have looked at the ordinances of Denver, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and Phoenix, and none of them specifically ban alcohol stoves in public spaces. The legal status of lighting one is essentially the same as the legal status of lighting a lighter, which is to say, it's fire, and open flame ordinances exist, but the enforcement target is the propane cylinder, not the spirit burner. A Trangia burner costs $5 to $15. The full Trangia stove system is $25 to $40 and looks like something a serious hiker bought at REI. That visual matters when you are trying to stay below the threshold of enforcement attention. It boils a pint of water in about 4 minutes versus 2 minutes on propane. That is not a survivable difference. It is a functional stove that fits in a jacket pocket and costs $4 to run for a week. Every alcohol stove I've ever used has been outside. I'll come back to why in a moment. Look at what we've covered so far. The tent is illegal, the bivy is legal. The tarp on poles is illegal, the windshield shade is legal. The propane stove is illegal, the alcohol stove is legal. The pattern is not random. The ban is on the visible version every single time. The illegal version announces presence. The legal version does the same job in a way nobody designed an ordinance around, because nobody thought someone would use a car windshield shade to sleep under. They banned the gear that announces itself. They forgot to ban the gear that works. Your grandparents understood this, not as survival philosophy, but as practice. You make do with what doesn't draw attention. The most useful thing you own is often the thing nobody looks at twice. Moving weight is the next problem. The shopping cart is the most visible piece of survival infrastructure on the street, and also one of the most legally exposed. California Penal Code 22435.2 makes possession of a cart removed from retail premises a misdemeanor up to a $1,000 fine. Most states have equivalent statutes. This is not a grants pass consequence. These laws have existed for decades. Enforcement varies, but the risk is real and has always been real. The wheeled duffel does this job and does it better in almost every way. A 30-inch wheeled duffel on Amazon runs $20 to $40. It carries the equivalent volume. It looks like luggage. Not like a person who has been living outside for 6 months, like a traveler. That visual shift meaningfully reduces your sweep visibility. Enforcement targets the obvious. The wheeled bag is not obvious. A collapsible hand truck from Harbor Freight costs $17 to $30, handles up to 150 pounds, and folds to nothing. Legal everywhere as personal property. Water's where I slow down, because in July in any major American city, this is the one that ends you faster than anything else on this list. The 5-gallon water jug is a real survival tool that draws real enforcement. Phoenix's property limitation provisions allow officers to require that a person's belongings fit within a defined footprint, sometimes as small as 3 feet by 3 feet. A full 5-gallon jug weighs 42 pounds and fails that test immediately. Los Angeles after-action sweep reports from LAPD list large water containers among the most commonly confiscated items. It's not universal, but it happens. The 3-liter hydration bladder is the replacement. Osprey and Platypus both make solid versions for $10 to $20. Empty, it weighs 3 ounces and lies flat in a bag. Full, it's about the size of a laptop sleeve, 6.5 pounds. The actual number, 1 gallon per day minimum in July heat. 2 gallons if you are moving, carrying weight, or doing anything physically demanding. Thirst is already dehydration by the time your body signals it. The signal fires late. In 95-degree heat with low humidity, a person can lose a liter of water per hour through sweat. You cannot catch that up after the fact. Free refill points that cost nothing, public libraries, which also give you air conditioning for the price of showing up, McDonald's, which is legally required to provide free water cups in most U.S. states, Walmart deli counters, and many fire stations will fill a container if you walk up and ask directly and respectfully. Map those locations before you need them. For power, the generator is universally restricted. Noise ordinances, fire codes, CO risk, several cities banning them explicitly by name. The survival critical uses for power in July are phone charging and a small fan. That's it. You don't need a generator for either. A 20-watt foldable solar panel costs $20 to $45 on Amazon. A 20,000 milliamp hour power bank costs $15 to $30. Together, they charge a phone 4 to 6 times and run a small USB fan for 8 to 12 hours overnight. A 5-inch USB fan blowing directly across your face through a summer night reduces perceived temperature by 5 to 10 degrees. That's the difference between 2 hours of broken sleep and 6 hours of actual rest. Some cities have targeted large solar panel arrays as evidence of permanent encampment, multiple panels, permanent wire runs, fixed mounting. A single folded panel in a backpack is personal electronics, and nothing reviewed classifies it otherwise. But be honest with yourself. The line between personal gear and encampment infrastructure is one cities will move when they decide to. Nobody held a meeting and decided that homeless people shouldn't have shade. There was no vote on a board somewhere that said, take the tarps. But the people who profit when encampments disappear have louder voices in City Hall than the people inside the tents. That is not a conspiracy. That is just who returns the calls. Business improvement districts are the mechanism. BIDs are quasi-governmental bodies funded by the property owners in commercial zones. They hire private security. They coordinate directly with city sanitation departments and with police to schedule and conduct sweeps. The Downtown Center bid in Los Angeles and the Union Square bid in San Francisco both have documented coordination relationships with city sweep programs. ProPublica and the Los Angeles Times investigated and reported on these structures in detail. The economics are not subtle. A cleared encampment raises the assessed value of surrounding properties. The BID's member businesses are worth more. The assessed tax revenue goes up. The funding that paid for the sweep comes back as increased property value and commercial rents, which is the entire point of a business improvement district. San Francisco's Proposition C, the 2024 ballot measure mandating citywide camping enforcement, received substantial financial support from technology and real estate interests. Mark Benioff, Michael Moritz. The campaign finance records are public through the SF Ethics Commission. The measure passed, the sweep scaled. California passed AB 1699 in 2022, which requires 90-day storage of confiscated belongings with the right to retrieve them. That's a real law. The Los Angeles City Controller conducted audits in 2022 and 2023 and found the storage program had significant compliance failures. Items were frequently unavailable, frequently lost. The law exists on paper. In practice, a sweep is a loss. More than 7,000 encampment cleanups in Los Angeles in 2023. The Bureau of Sanitation reported removing more than 50 tons of material. That is not debris. That is sleeping bags and medications and ID documents and the winter coat someone saved 3 months to buy, loaded into trucks, driven to a storage facility miles away that requires identification to access, staffed by a city that the city controller found routinely failed to return what it was legally required to return. The system is not designed to help people survive the heat. It's designed to move the problem out of the sight line of the properties next to it. Now I want to drop the register for a minute. Alcohol stoves produce carbon monoxide. Every combustion process does. Outside with any air movement, the CO disperses and the concentration never reaches a dangerous level. In a closed vehicle, in a bivy with no ventilation gap, in any enclosed space without airflow, carbon monoxide builds quietly to lethal concentrations, and you do not feel it building. You feel sleepy. You feel confused, and then you don't feel anything. Every alcohol stove burn I have done has been outside or adjacent to an open window. That is not a preference, that is the condition. If you are running a vehicle for cooling, I understand why. I've done it. But 3 things are required. Windows cracked, at least 2 of them, on opposite sides of the vehicle. Never parked backed against a wall, never in a hollow or dip where exhaust pools, and a CO detector. Kitty model 9NR7601, about $20 on Amazon. Plugs into any standard outlet or car adapter. If you are sleeping in a vehicle with any combustion source running nearby, that detector is not optional. I am not going to be the man who gets you hurt to win a click. Heat stroke. This is the one that ends people. Heat exhaustion feels like being sick, sweating heavily, dizzy, nauseous. Your body is in the fight and it's managing. Get to shade, stop moving, drink water. Heat exhaustion is survivable. Heat stroke is different. Core body temperature above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, above 40 Celsius. The sweating stops. The person starts acting confused, disoriented, aggressive. They may lose consciousness. That is a medical emergency. Fatality rates run from 20 to 80% without immediate treatment. You call 911 and you cool them down simultaneously. You do not wait to see if they improve. You wet down their skin with whatever water you have anywhere on the body, because the evaporation pulls heat directly out of the blood near the surface. You do not wait. If you are on antidepressants, antihistamines, diuretics, or beta blockers, your heat tolerance is lower than someone who is not on those medications. They impair your ability to sweat and regulate core temperature. Your personal threshold is lower than the general number. Know that going in. 1 gallon of water per day, minimum. 2, if you are active. Thirst is already late. I've seen a few methods circulating that I want to address directly. Running the car AC all night with the windows closed. I know the logic. You're inside, the car is cool, the engine is running. First, 30-plus states have anti-idling laws. California caps it at 5 minutes in most situations. New York, Texas, New Jersey, Florida all have similar statutes. A running engine at 2 in the morning draws attention, and the fines run from $100 to $1,000. Second, exhaust CO pools around the vehicle, especially near any wall or in any low spot, and gets pulled back through air intakes. Third, the CPSC estimates 150 to 200 people die annually from vehicle CO poisoning in non-garage, non-enclosed settings. Outside doesn't mean safe. Dark tarps for shade. The instinct is to cover up. I had the same instinct, but dark material absorbs solar radiation and re-radiates it as heat. A dark blue or black tarp in direct July sun becomes a radiant heat source directly above you, raising the temperature of the air trapped underneath. You are adding heat, not blocking it. Dark absorbs, silver reflects. That's physics, not preference. And getting it backwards in July is dangerous. And newspaper insulation in summer. Real in winter for cold weather dead air insulation. Completely irrelevant in July. Newspaper absorbs moisture, breaks down in humidity, attracts pests. Do not spend heat survival energy on it. I know what some of you are thinking right now, that people do get hurt with this gear, that they die from stoves in enclosed spaces and CO in vehicles and fires from mylar near flame. You are right. They do. Those deaths are real, and I am not dismissing them. But more people die from having no gear at all. This summer, Maricopa County buried 645 people. About a third of those deaths involved people experiencing homelessness. You know what the survival rate is for people who have shade, water, and a functioning stove? Dramatically higher. The answer to dangerous information is not less information. It is better information with the conditions stated clearly. Every method I've described has a condition attached to it. Those conditions are the difference between the tool working and the tool killing you. That is why I say them. Now, the one I saved, the windshield shade, does not only work over your head. Concrete and asphalt store heat from the sun all day and release it upward through the night. At 2 in the morning in a Phoenix summer, asphalt surface temperature can still be above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You are lying on a radiator that runs all night with no off switch. Whatever is between you and the ground is between you and a heat source that bakes upward from below while the residual warm air settles down from above. Most people think about shade as something overhead. The ground underneath you is generating as much heat as the sky. Lay a windshield shade flat between you and the ground, reflective side facing down into the pavement, and it bounces the ground radiation back into the asphalt instead of into your back. Put the mylar bivvy over you, silver side facing out. You have created a reflective envelope. Ground heat deflected below, solar and radiated air heat deflected above. A thin, still air layer between you and both. In a 100-degree ambient, lying still, that system puts your felt temperature closer to 85, maybe 88 degrees Fahrenheit. That is still hot. I will not tell you it's comfortable, but it is below the threshold where your body is in an active emergency. It is survivable sleep instead of a dangerous night. 2 items: a $10 windshield shade from the dollar store, a $15 emergency bivy from Amazon, $25. That is the system the ordinance writers forgot to code for. It does not look like camping. It does not look like a structure. It does not fit the legal definition of anything they have yet written a law against. And it works. So here's what I'd do before the sun's up tomorrow. Get the emergency bivy, silver side, out in summer. Pair it with clear 6mm plastic sheeting if rain is coming, not the blue tarp. Get 2 large windshield shades, one for above and one to lie on. Pick up a bottle of heat yellow label from any auto parts store and a small Trangia burner. 3-liter hydration bladder filled and the 4 nearest free refill points mapped before you need them. The wheeled duffel instead of anything that looks like a cart. A foldable solar panel and a power bank for the phone and the USB fan. And the $20 CO detector if there is any chance of combustion in an enclosed space near you. None of it draws a second look. None of it fits the legal definition of a structure. All of it works. What's the cheapest thing that ever got you through a bad night? I want to hear it. The method you worked out when the expensive version wasn't an option. The thing you figured out at 2 in the morning when it had to work. Drop it below. I read everyone. Stay cool, stay sharp, and remember, the people the world walks past know things the rest of us forgot.